Joining us right now, Bill Kristol. He's the editor of Weekly Standard. Bill, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you. How are you?
Well, I'm good, but, I'm perplexed over this Syria issue, and but finally it was all clear to me last night when I saw that Cher had gone to Twitter. Here's what Cher said, because I know, Bill, you often go to Cher when you're perplexed about major strategic foreign policy issues. She said, and I'm quoting now, "I believe if President Obama bombed Syria, it might be his downfall. He could go from loved to loathed. You can't go against the will of 80% of Americans." Bill Kristol, you are a proponent of military intervention in Syria. Is this really a secret conservative way to turn the public via Cher against Obama?
Yeah, right. That would be clever of me and of us. But
Listen, I've read
history suggests we're not that clever. Maybe you're not aware of that. I think it's the right thing to do for the U.S. I think we should have been involved much earlier, and obviously have now let things get to a horrible pass with 100,000 dead and the dictator using chemical weapons and Al-Qaeda getting stronger among the opposition. I still think it's a strong case for going in, especially after Obama drew the red line and we have a dictator using chemical weapons. But I sympathize with my friends, and it's probably most of my friends actually, who are very hesitant and reluctant. I mean, John Kerry said this morning in London, the American Secretary of State, that he's trying to reassure the Europeans, anything we did would be, I think what he said, very limited, very targeted, even said incredibly limited.
Wow.
So how can you how can you rally the American public, which is skeptical and which needs to be rallied, for military action on the one hand, where you say it's necessary, it's absolutely necessary, it's the right thing to do, it's an important thing to do. Kerry used the Munich analogy last week, and they say, but don't worry, it's going to be unbelievably limited. I mean, really, is that credible? If it's Munich, if it's a big moment, if there are real things at stake in the Middle East and beyond, don't we have to be willing to do what it takes? And so I think that the messaging, it's not just messaging, the actual policy of the administration is so ambiguous, not to say self-contradictory, that even though I think it's the right thing to do and I would vote for it, I mean, the administration is not making it easy to make the case.
Well, and a lot of people have gone to these classified hearings, and one hears they walk away and they're a little less than convinced about the evidence. What do you think about that?
I think the evidence is strong. I think the regime used the weapons. I don't think there's much question about that. Whether Assad personally ordered it, we don't know, but I don't think that changes much. I mean, he's a dictator, and his regime used them, and they've used them before, incidentally, over the last year. So I don't think it's much question that he's decided that that's a part of, if it's necessary to him to use those weapons to win the war, to intimidate the population, to stop people from joining the other side if they're scared of what might happen. He's willing to do that. This is a brutal, bloodthirsty dictator. We've seen that over the last couple of years. But look, and I think we've seen the consequences of American inaction and withdrawal from the Middle East over the last couple of years, and I think it's going to make the world much more dangerous. And it's the responsibility for conservatives like me to do what we can. When Obama even wants to do something little in the right direction, I think to support and encourage him, and to encourage our friends on the Hill to support him when it's right to do so. Plus, I just think generally, if an American president makes this kind of request, it's very dangerous to say no. You're really
to not have his back internationally.
Yeah, I just think it really raises questions. But having said all that, again, I'm for it, but I've got to say, even I'm a little rattled by the utter frivolity in a way with which the administration seems to be taking it. I mean, the president of the United States saying on Friday, I was elected to end wars. This is the last thing I want to do. He wasn't elected to end wars. He was elected to do what he's supposed to do as president of the United States, to do his constitutional duties.
To protect American interests.
Going to war, and it might mean at times not going to war. But this notion that it's all about him, and it's just, oh, God. But nonetheless, he's the president. He's the only one we have for the next 3.5 years. And I hate the idea of him being weaker and us being weaker in the world over the next 3 years.
Well, you mentioned the Constitution, and a lot of people have said, okay, if Congress goes against this, and that if the president then goes forward, as he has retained the option of doing, he's made it very clear, and his Secretary of State made it very clear, that they might choose to go forward anyway. Wouldn't that be, after Congress had weighed in, unconstitutional?
I don't know if it would be strictly unconstitutional, but I think it would be extremely risky to do. It's a matter of just American sort of public and civic life. I mean, if you never went to Congress in the first place, I don't think he had to go to Congress for a very limited strike. Other presidents have done things like this, only notifying Congress afterwards and, in effect, getting approval afterwards. But having gone to Congress, having had this big run-up, giving a nationally televised speech tomorrow night, I think it's almost inconceivable that he could act right after a congressional disapproval.
Rejection, yeah.
Done. I don't think we're going to have a congressional disapproval. I'm not so sure we'll have a congressional approval. I think the leadership of Congress will not bring it to a vote if they don't have the votes. I
Really?
Well, I think you could imagine them substituting into some sort of resolution that's watered down, that calls for the UN Security Council to re-engage on this, that waits for the UN inspector's report later this week. I just think it's too damaging to actually have the up or down vote. Maybe I'm wrong.
Interesting.
But I kind of think Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, has been very quiet. And when he's very quiet, he's often cooking up something like this that either, depending on how you look at it, is either a statesman-like compromise or a face-saving gesture that just gets people out of the mess that we're in.
Bill Kristol's our guest. Of course, he's the editor of Weekly Standard. And Bill, if you could, I haven't heard a good response to this, and I know that you are a passionate and very articulate proponent of intervening here. We know that many of this is a civil war right now going on in Syria. We know that many of the rebels are associated with al-Qaeda. If we weaken Assad and he ends up being deposed by this rebellion, how do we know that we're not helping al-Qaeda? And how do we know that al-Qaeda then won't have possession of these chemical weapons?
Al-Qaeda's gotten stronger the longer we stayed out. So I think Al-Qaeda, and if we continue to stay out, and if the rebels gain control of some or all of the country, it will be Al-Qaeda control. The best shot at preventing either Assad from getting away with this or from Al-Qaeda getting possession of the weapons is for us to be in helping our friends, to the degree we have friends there, and having some presence there, which allows us to know what's going on, and allows us to deal with Al-Qaeda.
But we haven't really been good at picking our friends over there.
Yeah, the track record is not great. Look at Libya right now. Look at Egypt right now.
Well, in both cases, actually, we did too little, in my view, especially in Libya, where we went in and did the right thing and then totally pulled out. We're okay. And the fact is, in Iraq and Afghanistan, we've been able to beat back extremists on both sides. Certainly in Iraq, we did that with both the Shia extremists and the Sunnis.
But that required boots on the ground, and they've vowed not to do that.
Well, look, that's fair enough, and the bombing strikes will be very limited. Once you say no boots on the ground, there's a limit to how much power you have. But there are rebels who are not Al-Qaeda. We can help them. If the bombing could help them, there are no guarantees in this world. But look, it's not as if us not going in means that Al-Qaeda doesn't get those weapons either. So I think as a practical matter, the chances are better for us with us going in. But it's not a black and white thing. I just think we were better off with the bombing than without.
Well, Bill Kristol, it's always good to hear from you on all issues. And I'll be honest with you, this has been an issue where it's been hard to get a lot of our regular guests to be proponents for intervention. So we really appreciate you coming in and making a good case.
My pleasure.
All right.